Kuzuzamuna. Welcome to the Bhutan Education and Technology Academy Park, the Beta Park in short. Sir Michael Rutland, O.B.E, Honorary Consul of the United Kingdom to Bhutan, and I'm speaker for the Bhutan Dialogue session today. Dr. Phuntsho, esteemed founder and president of Loden Foundation, incidentally also one of our advisors on the Beta Advisory Committee, and our host for the Bhutan Dialogue session today, Mr. Gerald Delhi, distinguished resident coordinator of United Nations Bhutan, Bhutan Dialogues team from Loden and United Nations Resident Coordinator's Office, Phuntsho, learners and associates of Beta Park, ladies and gentlemen in the conference hall here, as well as those of you viewing from outside. On behalf of the Board of Directors and Senior Management of the Beta Park, and on my own behalf, I have the honor to heartily welcome each one of you to the 42nd session of Bhutan Dialogues on the alive and kicking topic, are we learning the right way? It is a great privilege for the Beta Park to host this timely session on education, learning and development, I believe, as part of the larger ongoing discourse on education reform in Bhutan. Thank you, Loden Foundation. Thank you, UN Resident Coordinator's Office, for bringing this session to the Beta Park. Thank you, Bhutan Dialogues, for coming to the mountains away from the madding crowd of Thimphu. Once again, on behalf of the Beta Park community here in Chamjeka, welcome to the 42nd session of Bhutan Dialogues on Bhutan's own and only Silicon Mountain campus, as we call it. May I now call upon Mr. Gerald Delhi, Resident Coordinator of UN Bhutan, for his opening remarks. Sir, over to you.
As I serve my country, I have a number of priorities. Number one is education. Education is empowering. It's a social equalizer, and it facilitates self-discovery, which leads to realizing one's full potential. His Majesty the King. Kuzuzambola. Welcome to the 42nd session of Bhutan Dialogues. Our theme today is, are we learning the right way? An investment in knowledge pays the best interest. Education is one of the most significant agents of change that an individual and a country can invest in to prosper. Good education shapes the way people feel, think, and behave in a way that shoulders their success and help reach goals and contribute towards making the world a better place to live in. In Bhutan, education has improved both in modern and monastic programs over the years. Nonetheless, as time moves forward with increased technological advancements and globalization, so must the education system. It's important to bring new foresight into the education system so as to be prepared for the future. His Majesty's casuals on education present a clear vision for the upgrade that is needed. We cannot be stagnant on education and learning. We need to surpass ourselves in this most critical part of the economy. Are we learning the right way? Is the very question we must persistently ask as we invest in our children and their children. The Speaker, Michael Rutland, was the first Honorary Consul of Bhutan to the UK and is now the first British Honorary Consul to Bhutan. He established and taught at the Ugyen Wangchuck Academy back in 1971. He worked for the UN in Bhutan as a short-term expert in technical and vocational education. He taught physics in the UK for over 30 years, and for his endeavours was awarded the Physics Teacher of the Year 2000. He was awarded the Order of Merit Gold by His Majesty the King and the O.B.E by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Missing from his CV is the fact that Michael is a storyteller par excellence. Our host, Dr. Karma Phuntsho is both president of Loden Foundation and the founder of Ugyen Agency for Bhutan's Cultural Documentation and Research, a project that carries out extensive audiovisual documentation to support local communities, preserve and pass on Bhutan's rich cultural heritage to future generations. My closing. I suggest everyone to keep their questions short and to the point. For our online viewers, please drop your questions in the chat box. Pema and Ugyen, and perhaps Sarah, will be compiling the questions and will read them out, and the speaker will answer your questions midway through the session. I wish to thank Hezon and Meta Park for hosting us today. Please allow me to close with a quote from the UN Secretary General. In the end, it comes down to values. We want the world our children inherit to be defined by the values enshrined in the UN Charter. Kashidale and Kavichela.
Michael, Kuzuzampo, and welcome to Bhutan Dialogues.
Thank you.
Education is so important and fundamental to human development. And here in Bhutan, we have over 1/3 of the population in full-time education. And most of us actually spend 12 to 16 years going through education. It's so important, but I think it has been rendered even more urgent with successive research on quality of education and the most recent Royal Gasho delivered last year. So it's quite timely for us to now discuss and rethink the current education system to perhaps design and deliver a system that is better than what is in place right now. And here at Bhutan Dialogues, that's the kind of discussion we like to carry out, to refine our ideas of human progress, to ask questions about what problems we have, why we have them, and what can we do about them. And we do that through civil conversations involving mindful listening, right speech, and particularly focused to empower the young people in sort of pushing their horizons of experience and broadening their boundaries of critical thinking. So it's very apt that we talk about education. And in fact, actually, today's Quinset headlines, which you must have read, talks about how there's a very high attrition rate among school teachers. Some 322 school teachers having left voluntarily this year alone, when the nation is actually going through a serious unemployment issue. So what is happening and what can we do about it? So to discuss these education matters, it's really great for us to have you here because you're a doyen in education. You are a lifelong teacher, I would say. You have been almost involved and a witness to the history of school education in Bhutan since 1970. So thank you for coming to be with us. And as part of our ritual, I would like to now ask you actually to tell us very briefly about how you came to be where you are right now. If possible, giving us some insights into your life that's not on your regular CV.
Indeed, Dr. Karma. Can I first of all say what a great honour it is to be on your programme. I compare it, when I tell people about Bhutan Dialogues, I compare it to the BBC programme Hard Talk, where one is put on the spot by the questioner. With regard to where I am, I'm a very old man now. I'm well past my sell-by date. And how did I get here? How did I come to be what I am? Well, what you want me to say, of course, is my educational background. It wasn't very good. I went to a very good English boarding school. I did a degree in maths and physics at London University, which has served me very little in my life. What has served me in my life is not the qualifications that I got. It's the people that I met. It's the living, it's the observing of life. But above all, it's the people, it's my friends, it's my colleagues. They are what has made me anything that I am today. And the other element, folk, is luck. You may in Buddhism call it karma, I don't know. But luck, friends, and the most important thing of all, which has got me where I am, looking for and taking opportunities. And a very famous British field marshal once said in a speech to the boys of Eton College, "Boys, whenever I'm faced with a choice of two alternatives, it has always been my principle to take the bolder option." And the bolder option for me was deciding in 1971 to accept the invitation to come to Bhutan. Because actually, it is coming to Bhutan which changed my life. So, I don't put much store by qualifications. I'm more interested in competence. And competence doesn't come from knowledge. It comes from knowing how to use the knowledge. So if you ask me, how did I get where I am? The answer is friends, taking opportunities, and just luck.
Wonderful. I don't know if I would call it luck. I sort of believe that the universe conspires things to happen when they're meant to happen.
Indeed.
You may call it luck, but I think we have to put our own sort of part, our own bit, and that can be through intention, through prayers, aspirations, whatever. Anyway, but let's go to the topic that's related to education.
Yeah.
What you make it very clear is a knowledge-based, a certification-focused education system is not right. And that's what we have right now. How can we change it?
First of all, let me disagree with your very opening statement, which is that 1/3 of the population of Bhutan are in education. I would totally disagree with that, and I would say 100% of the population of Bhutan are in education, because education has to go on from the moment you're born till the moment you die. And if we see education as just being what happens in schools and institutions, we have profoundly misinterpreted what education is.
Okay.
So, if I could just
Yes,
make that
so,
point.
I think education in a very broad sense is
Yes.
what you're talking about, whereas I think I qualified my statement by saying full-time education, meaning taking education as your main occupation. Whereas a farmer,
Right.
of course, learns while farming, but the farmer doesn't do farming to learn. Anyway, let's come back to this issue, this very critical
Right.
issue, I think, of where the focus is of our education. Right now, you can see it's examination-centered. It is a process where certificates and degrees are highly, what would be the word, highly sought after,
Right.
highly valued,
Overvalue.
overvalued. But you think that is not really education.
Oh, I believe that is definitely
So-
not education.
So what
Yeah.
can we do going forward to really help promote skills that are
Right.
very important,
Well-
promote values that are fundamental?
The importance given to academic qualifications is something which has grown up in Bhutan since the day I first came here in 1971. In 1971, I remember a former minister saying to me, "Michael, if you've passed class 3, you can be a limpo." Now, if you've got a PhD, people are wanting to know what comes after that. We have become academically obsessed and we have become qualification obsessed. Qualifications mean nothing. What counts is the use to which you put your qualifications. And I'm sorry to say that an awful lot of people who have got master's degrees and Lord knows what, and Dr. Karma, I won't comment on PhDs, they actually have got the qualification, the letters after the name, and the salary increment that comes through RCSC, which is a big mistake. They've got all that, but they're not using their qualifications. So I believe qualifications and knowledge, just by itself, is of no value at all. What is of value is the use to which you put your knowledge and your qualifications. So the first thing I would do, let me go, I'm a great one for making my point by going to an extreme. If I were in charge, I would forbid any more PhDs in Bhutan. for a moratorium period of 5 years.
So let me come to that. Not because I have a PhD,
Right.
but let's talk about qualifications and certificates and degrees in general. Don't they actually prove that somebody has gone through a rigorous training and a regime that shapes their character, that shapes their competence? So I wouldn't totally sort of dismiss degrees, but I think, isn't it true also that some professions, like if you're a university professor, you couldn't possibly be a very good university professor who hasn't gone through postgraduate training himself or herself. But if you're a farmer or a politician, that's a very different category. So, what
I have a lot of things to agree with, or disagree with you there. First of all, I don't think that possessing a degree is a proof of competence. And I all the time would say competence rather than qualifications. I would rather have somebody working for me who was competent who had no qualifications rather than vice versa. Secondly, university professors need their PhD because it's a closed circuit. They are teaching people to get their PhDs, and so they need a PhD to teach the people all those often irrelevant skills that are necessary to do your PhD thesis. So it is like an animal feeding on itself. That's why they need the qualification.
But let me still come back to your point about competence and degrees. If you meet a total stranger, how would you know that person has any competence?
Right.
If you are in a recruitment company,
yes,
you have to look at their academic records, their sort of trainings and their work experience.
Well, no. If I want some, and I have spent quite a number of years recruiting teachers, I made the mistake on 3 occasions of recruiting a teacher with a PhD. In 2 cases, an Oxford PhD. Great mistake. They were so far divorced from the reality of the learning of a 15-year-old that they were total failures. And I learned my lesson. If I wanted to recruit a teacher, I looked at competence. I would talk to them, often at great length. I would have them teach a demonstration lesson. Because 90% of teaching is communication skills. Only 10% of it is knowledge. And if I look at my own subject, physics, the physics I learned at university was all totally irrelevant to my teaching 15-year-olds. So I put great store in a teacher for communication skills and then subject knowledge. So I don't pay attention to somebody's qualifications. I'm not interested in somebody's qualifications. I'm interested in what sort of person they are and how well they can do the job. But if I'm going to have my appendix taken out, I would like you to have a degree in medicine and surgery. So there are certain areas where, for example, a bridge, I'd like you to be a qualified civil engineer. And if somebody isn't, you see the results in 1 or 2 of the bridges.
So we generally agree that degrees and certificates do give an indication of what the person is.
Only in certain specific areas.
But I agree fully with the mistake you made. Because why would you hire a PhD to teach a 15-year-old? You could have hired a primary school teacher instead.
But I can tell you why, Dr. Kama. Because the parents were very impressed that on the staff you had 3 PhDs. And it's the same in Bhutan. Often the problem with education doesn't lie with the pupils and the students. The problem lies with attitudes of parents. And if you look at the degree question and the obsession with academia in Bhutan, it doesn't really come from the student. Mainly it comes from the parent. So anything which needs to be done to change that perspective in Bhutan needs to be aimed at changing parental opinion. You know dozens of parents who spend money to send their kids off.
I would disagree a little bit. Here is a suggestion. Let's say think about going forward. Parents may have that bias for degrees because the system as a whole prefers degrees. If you look at the election laws here, you have to have a first degree to even stand as a parliamentarian, as a nominee. So shouldn't the system, all the 3 actually arms, the executive, the judiciary and the legislative, should they have a system where you judge people on based on their competence and not based on their degrees or
Well, absolutely. I had a number of discussions about the issue of requiring a university degree to be a member of parliament. I think Bhutan is the only one of 2 countries in the world that has this rule. And if you require a university degree in the United Kingdom, half Boris Johnson's government would disappear down the drain. So I think it is a mistake. But it was an understandable mistake at the time, because the knowledge level that was seen to be required to be a member of parliament was very much related to development of Bhutan along the technical and academic line. I think what we see now is that the development of Bhutan doesn't just rest on academic and technical, it actually rests on people. And better a good person as my National Assembly representative rather than a highly qualified person who isn't good. So I do remember somebody saying to me, but they need to have a degree because they will be less corrupt. My answer to that was, if you've got a degree, you're cleverer at being corrupt. I like the good, plain, honest, competent person. Never mind the degrees. So we really need to get away from this obsession with qualifications.
Another element that we find in the education system here, I've read quite a lot of documents and policies, and you have this slogan almost, locally rooted and globally competent.
Yeah.
Now, as a cultural researcher, I hope that I'm in touch with the roots and the grassroots of Bhutan. I don't particularly think our education system has ever been locally rooted. Just to begin with, 90% or 85% of the instruction happens in the foreign language, and how could it be locally rooted? Is it globally competent? Because you come with the global exposure. You have been teaching in other countries.
Well, yes, and the first question I've asked is, what do you mean by globally competent? Let's face it, if you learn Newton's laws of motion, whether it be in Zonka, in Thimphu, or in English in Birmingham, Newton's laws of motion are global, so that is global knowledge. So when we talk about is Bhutan's education globally trending, I don't really know what one means by that. 2 + 2 = 4 all over the world in any language.
Yeah, I don't think it has to do with really the content of the curriculum or the information and the data, but more about the competence of the Bhutanese. The students going to a middle secondary school in Bhutan, are they as competent, as good as a middle secondary school student in the UK?
Right. Competent in what? What I would say...
Let's say communication.
All right, okay. Well, first of all, the Bhutanese student has a problem that the English student doesn't have. They have to learn in a foreign language, and at home they may speak any one of a dozen Bhutanese languages. So their learning is that bit more difficult. So they have a challenge. The fact that the average 12 or 14-year-old Bhutanese can probably speak Zonka, possibly a bit of Shashop or Umtap, can speak English, can speak a little bit of Hindi, can communicate in Nepali. No English student can do that. It's very difficult to get them even to communicate in English. So I would have said, in that point of view, Bhutanese students are far better than English students. The second reason why I think they're better, I believe the most important things for a young Bhutanese in Bhutan are 2 things: family and friends. And the friendship concept in Bhutan, I believe, is outstanding. It is far better than the friendship concept that one would find in England. So I think when we look at education in Bhutan, or young people in Bhutan, it is so easy to say, oh, well, they can't do this that you can do in America, you can't do that that they can do in London, they can't do that that they can do in Sydney. Bhutanese can do things which people in those countries cannot do. And I might add, if we look at America as our lodestone, as our guide for education, do not. How many students in schools have been killed by their fellow students in America. I'm not aware that it happens in Bhutan. So I think
if
we have
they
to
have
look
same
further.
access to firearms, do you think you can count?
Oh yes, but we don't. I mean,
so
we
that's
don't. Yeah.
So here we are talking about really the character of the students, the competence of the students. In a way, I'm actually very pleased that you think the education system here is doing much better than what most people think.
Well, no.
If the students are good, why should
Yeah.
the school
It depends. It is one of the things is this, and I believe this is absolutely fundamental. Education is such a marvelous thing to talk about because nobody knows what the right answer is. If the question is 3 + 2 = what, we can do that in 5 seconds with luck. But education all over the world, there is no such thing as the perfect education system. Secondly, as times change, whatever education system you have has to change. So it is a wonderful area for a talking shop. If you look at all the research papers written on education, I believe they exceed the number of research papers written on any other topic. It is brilliant for people who want to do an MA. So there is no right answer. All you can do is try to find roughly where the end of the rainbow is. But if you're trying to find the end of the rainbow, you are doomed to disappointment. But you can get a PhD because you can write a thick paper.
But let's go back to that again. I think because education is very dynamic, that there are changes happening even within one society in a couple of generations. Like right now in Bhutan,
Right.
I think the education system that worked in the 1980s is no longer most relevant. Just like the election laws you mentioned.
And the bureaucracy.
Yeah. So that requires more thinking, more discussion, more
Right.
research to make it apt, to
Right.
make it effective.
Okay, so what is required? A change you make in education, whether it even be a little change in one topic in a syllabus or the whole system, does not show results for one complete generation. It's not like other things where you change something on the fiscal policy and the results show up in the money in Bhutan next year. Education requires a generation for the changes to show their effect. Therefore, it requires continuity. There is no point in changing educational ideas every 5 years with a new government. And we have seen that with our last 3 governments. Each minister, each government has brought in some new ideas which have disappeared when the next government comes into play. We need continuity in educational policy. And I would advocate very strongly removing politics from education. I would close down the Ministry of Education tomorrow, and I would replace it with a National Education Council. And I would have a highly competent person as director of that, who would be in post for 10 years, long enough to think, make changes, and then be accountable for the results. So that's
We have had this conversation before
Yes.
as well, and I think we agree. At least 2 of us here agrees on how education should remain apolitical.
Right.
As we have seen this interference into education from different governments. But your solution of having an education council, how is that going to work? Now, I'll give you 2 reasons why I doubt it. To begin with, even when you have a council, there was the Royal Education Council. I was a member of it.
I was
You were
too,
as well.
yes.
There's a University Council for Royal University of Bhutan. In 2013, when the new government came in, they dissolved the Royal Education Council without even telling the members of the council.
You found that too, did you? So did I.
Both of us. We
Yes.
were sent a message saying that it's being merged with the curriculum department,
That's right,
Paro, and it
yes.
will be moved to Paro. The council was actually the authority on what the Royal Education Council should be doing. But the government came in and dissolved the council. The second example. When a new government came in 2018, I don't know about other members, I was also sent a polite letter from the Royal University of Bhutan saying, we don't any longer need your services as member of the council. I thought the Royal University council was the ultimate authority to decide on who will be the member, when the member should retire, and so forth. So, a council didn't solve the problem for the Royal Education Council or the Royal University of Bhutan from my point of view. Then more importantly, if we get the wrong guy for 10 years, and who will be that guy, and who will appoint that guy, who will elect that guy? If you leave it up to the people, you'll probably get as good as what we get as a minister or prime minister. So how would you do
Right. First of all, I support your views on the Royal Education Council. I think it's a great pity that its aims were frustrated to a degree by it being absorbed into the ministry. Secondly, the fact that, I won't go into the Royal University Council, I don't know enough about it, but the fact that something has failed once doesn't mean to say it will fail again. One of the most important things that I want to say to everybody and to the audience, don't be afraid to fail. And can I quote our blind physiotherapist, Sangadorji, with his famous phrase, failure is the pillar of success. So from the experience of the original Royal Education Council, I think we need to learn from the change. I won't call it failure. So it is quite simply up to the rules and laws governing the institution of the National Education Council, whether it continues or not. With regard to you get one bad person for 10 years, oh no you don't. Oh no you don't. Accountability, and I was so pleased to see that His Majesty put a lot of emphasis on accountability. The person in charge of the National Education Council, if they do not produce the goods, I would give them assessment every 2 years, but I don't mean Driglum Namshari sort of assessment. I mean hard assessment. What have you achieved? What have you done? What changes have you made? Every 2 years, if you cannot show you're performing, you are out. And I did once ask a certain head of the Royal Civil Service Commission.
Isn't that what we are doing with the government?
No,
Every
it's
5
not.
years we make an
No.
assessment.
Come along, my dear Dr. Karma. People are
In principle, that's what it
People are not
is.
voting for competence. People are voting for the National Assembly members according to relationship,
person
who
again,
they
Mike.
know, etc.
But this same person for 10 years may be appointed not because of merit or competence, but
No,
purely
well,
because of
I
background or connections.
I would have the person appointed by a single person who gave that person's authority, and I'm trying to be very tactful by not mentioning the person, but they would carry the authority, and that is what is important. And that person would be hired or fired at that level. And the accountability would be very strong. So, you cannot guarantee anything will work. I have another motto, and since delighted to have an audience of students here today, Dr. Karma, can I tell you my motto for the students? If a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. They'll all tell you, all your teachers and parents will say, if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing well. Forget that. If it's really worth doing, it's worth trying.
Yes.
And if it turns out badly, learn from it and try again. Remember Robert Bruce with the spider climbing up the spider's web. So the fact REC didn't quite go where it was meant to go does not mean we should not try a National Education Council. I believe the really important thing it will bring is continuity.
I suppose there is a chance that things could go well. Certainly things will be more effective, I suppose, when you have such a centralized power. But if something so autocratic always works, then North Korea should have the best education system. I don't know.
Well, probably in North Korea, yes, they do have a good education system. And let's look at Singapore. Now, Singapore is a place where people would quote as having a good education system. Singapore is autocratic. Lee Kuan Yew ran a one-party democracy, and he succeeded with Singapore's development precisely because there was continuity and focus. So,
but let's go back to
Right.
education here. You mentioned about how we should, how people should sort of be willing to do it badly.
Right.
It's an
Well,
amazing
No. You're taking words out of my mouth. I didn't say willing to do it badly. You suggest the intention might be there. What I'm saying is try.
Try, yes, you get that. So
And you learn from your mistakes.
it's a very important value, I think. It's a very,
Yes.
very important educational sort of attitude we should have. But when you look at our graduates, school graduates or college graduates, there are some of these values that existed in the pre-modern education era in Bhutan, but somehow we have lost them. Self-discipline, hard work, sort of diligence. There's so many such values that are missing. What
You're
has happened?
absolutely right. And I completely agree with you. First of all, it's not surprising Bhutan has an alien education system because it was imported from India, and it imported the Indian education system of the 1960s, and the Indian education system of the 1960s was imported from Britain in the 1930s. So what Bhutan has actually got is a relic of 100 years ago. And this is why, if I had a motor car which was 100 years old, I can tinker with the mirror, I can adjust the clutch. What I really need is to scrap the car and buy a new one. And sometimes you come to a point of change where you have to be prepared to throw away the past and begin anew. And I would like to think that in a small country like Bhutan, that is achievable. So when I say my old car, I'm thinking of quite a number of organizations and institutions which served their purpose decades ago when Bhutan was emerging from isolation. But they are still the same old car. Perhaps they need to be scrapped and new ones built.
So
And
you
I'm not mentioning the institutions because I don't want to get into trouble.
So you read my mind. I want to ask you which institutions should go first.
Well, I would say, I've been very honoured and privileged to have known Bhutan for 50 years this year. So I've seen it from the beginning of its development on. I believe, for example, with great respect to our highly competent bureaucrats, I believe the bureaucracy system, which was created way back in the 70s and was very appropriate and served the country very well for decades, now in 2021, in the 21st century, perhaps it's a bit like my old car. Perhaps one needs to radically rethink the bureaucratic systems that we have. And I won't go into any more detail because I don't want to be assassinated on my way home, but I really believe the time has come to radically rethink.
No, but I think such broad general remarks don't help us. We really need to come with some practical tips on what could be done.
Right, but do you really want me to tell you?
Yes.
So I would cease that act, and if I were the government now, I would totally rewrite the act, because it is the act, not the Constitution which says it has to exist, it is the act that says how it works. So I would rewrite the act, and while I had a government majority, I would pass it through the National Assembly. Now, in doing so, I'm on very dangerous ground, because to do so might upset quite a lot of civil servants. So, I would need to be brave. But unless brave decisions are made, we will never get anywhere.
I can totally see this doable. We don't necessarily have to throw the whole act out.
No.
What we need is amend the act, and that's
right.
something very doable through the RCAC and the Parliament. We have also talked in the past about how teachers actually could do better being separated from the civil service.
Right. If allow me to get onto another hobby horse. I believe that the job of being a teacher is so different from the job of being an office-based civil servant that the teaching force should be separated from the civil service. I suggested this to the secretary of our CSC about 24 years ago, and I got a very nasty look, because it would mean the civil service would shrink by about 30%. But I would set up, alongside the National Education Council, which determined educational policy, I would set up a National Teachers' Council, which would be responsible for recruitment, retention, motivation, and standards of teachers. And it would be dedicated only to those 4 elements of the teaching force. I believe it would reduce the resignation rate. I believe also that, if I could say another thing about the civil service, it seems to me daft that in a country with limited human resources, if I resign from the civil service to go and do a really good job somewhere else, I cannot come back. I cannot rejoin the civil service, bringing with me all that experience and knowledge and skill that I've learned somewhere else. Why cannot somebody leave the civil service, go and work in the private sector, and then come back to the civil service? Or why cannot somebody from the private sector join the civil service, go back to the private sector? Same with teachers. Teachers would benefit enormously from doing another job. My career has been 30-odd years teaching, but also 1/3 of my life has been as an officer in the armed forces of the United Kingdom and the Sultan of Oman's armed forces. I learned so much to make me a better teacher from working outside teaching. The same opportunities should be available for teachers here. Have flexibility, fluidity, transmission, not only with teachers.
Yeah, I think in many
the whole
areas,
workforce.
we have, I think such pathways would really help people move, gain experience. But even with politics, this idea of a cooling period for a whole year, even local government officials having to go through that, perhaps that can be reduced. Anyway.
Well, it does seem terribly silly to me that if I'm a doctor, and I offer myself as a candidate for a political party, I can't go back to being a doctor again. I mean, that is...
I suppose, by the same logic that we have for teachers being removed from civil service, we could also say health professionals should be also removed from civil service, because these are sort of service providers that
That's right.
have to come with a very different mindset and attitude than the bureaucrats and the regulators.
Absolutely. Yes.
Let's break here. I have a few more questions, but let's ask the audience if they have questions.
Thank you. Just a quick question on the Royal Education Council that was established at that post. How do you think it should be reconstituted at a more national level? Do you think the membership in terms of cross-cutting from the primary through to all levels of education? Because at times we have also tended to cut across the tertiary education, neglecting the primary part of the education. What do you think went wrong, sir?
The most important part of a person's education happens in their first 10 years. I repeat it. The most important part of a person's education happens in their first 10 years. So primary education is the most important part of a nation's education system. Never mind the Royal University and people doing degrees. If the grounding of a child in their young years is bad, very difficult to rectify that. So, how would I reconstitute the Royal Education Council? The answer is I wouldn't. The answer is I would divorce education from politics. The REC suffered from politics, as you probably are aware. I would divorce education from politics. I would set up the National Education Council, which was responsible for all education policy, and that included one section of the National Education Council, which was focused on curriculum design and syllabus development. Now, the problem is this, that what we have seen for several decades is tinkering with the system. I referred to my old motor car, and what would it be like if I tinkered with the mirror, when actually what my car needed was a new engine? It gets nowhere. Education is a very complex, holistic system. You can't just tinker with little bits of it and hope that it turns out good. So my National Education Council will be taking a holistic view of education. One section of it will be curriculum and syllabus design, but because it was in NEC, it would be very closely linked with all other aspects of education too. It wouldn't be a separate thing. So that's what I would do. Instead of, we love acronyms, thanks to Mr. Daly and the United Nations, so instead of REC, we would have NEC.
If we have someone from REC here, I'm pretty sure, or from the ministry, I'm pretty sure they would go on to explain how they are looking at education system holistically and are bringing systemic changes gradually.
Dr. Kamal. With respect to the ministry, they're not tinkering here and there with little bits. For example, sending all teachers off on a 3-day course called Innovative Learning, imagining that 3-day course for teachers, and I did look, the content of that was delivered by an Englishman. So I took a national pride in having a look at it, and I must say it didn't do much for my national pride. Tinkering like that, a 3-day course for teachers, revolutionises education in Bhutan. Nonsense. There's too much tinkering. There is not enough accepting we need a new engine.
But the new engine will cost us. Do you think we have resources?
You see, well, if we employ dozens of consultants from overseas, they'll bring in all these wonderful overseas ideas which are totally inappropriate in many cases for Bhutan, and that will cost a fortune. No, we have got enough knowledge, wisdom here in Bhutan. I believe we should move to Bhutanese doing more of these things. The first reaction of a civil servant, if you come up with an idea, we need to get a consultant in to advise us on that. I say, do it yourself. Get 3 or 4 people in your ministry to talk about it. Fine, take a little bit of advice, but it need not cost an arm and a leg if we do it ourselves.
How do we get around the challenge of innovating an education system that has teachers who are educated in an outdated system to teach younger generations of students who require a completely different outlook, skill sets and values to maximize their potential in the disruptive 4th industrial revolution?
Absolutely excellent question, Dr. Kama.
So how?
We have 8,000 teachers. You will not
9,000.
9,000. De minimis non curat
and
lex.
we are losing 20%, or we have lost 20% of the teachers in the last 6 years.
In England, the attrition rate is higher. There is nothing wrong in a teacher saying, I think I need a change of career. I did it twice. I went to work for the RAF, I went to work for the Sultan of Oman, I went to work for Mr. Daly's United Nations here in Bhutan. I opted out of my mainstream teaching 3 times. There is nothing wrong in that.
In fact, that may be one way of promoting innovation.
Absolutely right, because if you can attract some of those 200 back into teaching, then they're bringing new skills and knowledge back. But you ask, the question asks, how do you change the 9,000 teachers? Very difficult. There's an old proverb, a leopard cannot change its spots, but how I would do it is this. I would put a lot of money, effort and human resources into in-school, in-service training. Don't take people to Paro from Tashi Yangtze. I know you get DSA and that's a big attraction. But forget DSA. I would abolish DSA, but there we are. I'm even more unpopular now. I would base in-service training for current teachers in their schools. And in fact, when I did my master's degree in education, the thesis I wrote was...
I didn't know you wrote the thesis in your master's.
my thesis was on school-based in-service training. And if you do it through the schools, you only need 1 or 2 leaders in each school to run it. And you are attacking the whole of the 9,000 teachers. If what you want to do is bring them all to Paro for a 3-day course, A, it's a waste of time, B, it'll have no effect, C, it'll cost lots of money. So in-school-based, in-service training for current teachers. And that is a very effective and economical way of doing it.
I don't know how you do that on the ground.
Oh, it's very
right
simple.
now in Dagana,
Yeah.
according to news, I think about 25% of the schools don't even have a principal or something like that.
I'm not talking about a principal.
But if you need a leader in the school,
You need anybody can be a leader in a school. You don't have to be called principal. I know a number of schools in the United Kingdom when I was teaching there where the leader was definitely not the principal.
So that's fine. I think some principals may have the quality, others may not. But who would really be the trainers or the guides?
Right. So the first thing you have to do is to have the College of Education run a course for 50 leaders.
And that's pretty much what they're doing, perhaps with the
No, but what counts is what they actually do in that course. A whole lot of what goes on in the College of Education is a waste of time. For example, I would immediately, I won't divert onto initial teacher training, but I'll stick with this. You would use a College of Education to train 50 curriculum leaders, or whatever you like to call them, senior teachers. You would pay them more. They would then be distributed to 50 schools. Now, I know there are hundreds of schools. You cannot, Rome was not built in a day, but with luck, if you do it cleverly, you can build Rome in a couple of weeks. So I would train 50 leaders, I'd post them to 50 schools. I would institute during their training clear indication of how to convert a dyed-in-the-wool teacher. Now, I was a dyed-in-the-wool teacher. You try and get me to change anything because I knew I was right. How do you do it? You have to do it in a very subtle way. You don't just issue orders. You actually have to get the older teacher to see that a different way is actually not only better, but also easier. If you can show an old teacher that this way of doing it is actually a great deal easier, less work, less effort, you won't be so tired, you're getting somewhere. Now, let me take as an example, computers. I lived through the introduction of computers. Now, in the beginning in England, computers were issued to children, but not to teachers. The result being it was a complete failure because the teachers didn't understand computing. We then changed, I sat on a national board for this. We changed it and we issued the computers to teachers, not to pupils. And we produced 3 pieces of software which made the job of a teacher easier, adding up marks. Wow. It took me an hour to add up all the marks. Now I just press a button. Wow. So you use subtle ways to show existing experienced teachers easier ways of doing things. Now, you will never persuade every single leopard to change its spots. If a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. but so if you can achieve 80% hit rate, if you can get 80% of older teachers to change, you have gone a very long way. Look, when we vaccinate people, we know perfectly well the vaccine doesn't give you 100% protection against COVID-19, perhaps 80%. But we still do it and spend a lot of money on it. If a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. Remember that. I have one suggestion for a change in school that could be done in the beginning of the next academic year. And that is, at the moment, let's say mathematics. You're in your class 9C. You all have your mathematics lesson together. In the class, there's Dr. Phuntsho, who is a mathematics genius, and there's me, who finds it very, very difficult to understand that 2 and 2 do make 4. We're taught together. He's brilliant. I'm useless. The poor teacher. What does the teacher do? If he teaches to the middle, he's bored, and I'm lost. So, the change to make, which could be done at the beginning of this academic year, is to separate into ability groups for mathematics, English, and science. And I guarantee, and I know this from experience, that would raise the achievement and understanding rate of all pupils within 1 year. Not 5 years, within 1, and I know it from experience, I've done it.
I fully get the point. I agree with you, and I think I've been also advocating having more sort of streams for art, maths, I mean, to basically cater to all forms of intelligence and not just cognitive intelligence.
Well, yes, indeed.
But
we now come to another issue.
Yeah, that means, of course, having more teachers. And
no, it doesn't. If you do my setting, you've got 3 groups, 3 teachers. If you had them as classes, you've got 3 classes, 3 teachers. So what I'm advocating, this setting, requires no more teachers,
but extra work.
No extra. No. Look,
how would you cover the 3
the extra
groups?
work for me?
We stay right now to
yeah, right. If I am teaching 30 of you, ranging from you, brilliant, to me, a Dumbo, I have to work really hard, trying to gear my teaching. You're bored. I'm fed up. I don't understand. I have to work really hard. But if your group are all good at maths, my group are all useless, the teacher knows how to direct their teaching at your group and how to direct their teaching at my group. I was particularly good at teaching physics to kids who did not understand physics, because my basic principle, and I hope you're going to let me mention the Royal Tutorial Project,
yes,
my basic principle is keep it simple.
Yeah.
Good evening to you all. And the question I have is, in better we are providing few classes and more towards practical learning, which includes self-paced learning and this internship, and we also have projects. And do you think that's the right way to learn?
Yes, for some. Everybody's different. Some kids are highly academic and as clumsy as anything with their hands. Some kids are brilliant at making things, but really the finer points of English literature or history pass them by. All children are different, and that is one of the wonderful thrills of being a teacher, but it is also one of the great challenges of being a teacher. But it is also the great challenge for a national education system. How can you produce a system which caters to the differences? Now, in 1944, this question was raised after the war in the United Kingdom, and the 3 words were produced. Education should be suitable for a child's interests, abilities, and I've forgotten the 3rd word, natural ability to do something. Aptitude. So interest, ability, and aptitude. Those 3 things need to be taken into account. Now, what I would say is a problem here is that you get a packaged diet. It's rather like getting a packaged meal from McDonald's, and even if you don't eat beef, you've still got a hamburger in it. That isn't really very good. We need more choice in our education provision at school level.
This was a question that I wanted to ask you. Right now we have all the children going to the same classrooms, being taught by the same teacher, said whether they are bright or not so bright. Then they spend about 8 hours between classroom walls. What % of that time actually should be hands-on learning or taking on music or doing physics through practicals?
I need hardly tell you, Doshikama, this has been a question asked for 300 years. It's not a new question. It's not a new problem. It's a very old problem. So what are the answers? The answer is not perfect, but I would love to see a few academic high schools for those who are brainy, shall we say. But I would also like to see alongside that junior technical high schools. Now, many countries have done this with great success, including India. There is a wonderful junior technical high school in Kerala, for example. Malaya did it decades ago, and it was part of the basis of the economic success of Malaya. Singapore has done it. Junior technical high schools on par with and equal to academic high schools. You have to be careful what names you give them, otherwise you create the blue-collar job syndrome. But And a technical high school can be at very, very high intellectual level. So the thing I would do when you talk about it, I would offer a choice of secondary education after the primary level, one choice of which would be junior technical high schools. I would also offer a set of technical qualifications which was, number one, internationally recognized. You know, don't you? The Bhutan exams, class 10 and class 12, are not recognized outside Bhutan. It's a problem for anybody wanting to go to a university in England, for example. So my technical qualifications would be internationally recognized, and they would be progressive. That's to say, you could start at a basic plumber doing a water pipe and go all the way up to technical degree level. So there was no difference between you ending up at the University of Oxford studying, actually I don't know what you did study, whatever it was you did, and somebody who starts off as a plumber ending up with a degree in water systems. So that is what I would do. That requires quite a big change. It does require money. To set up a technical high school is more expensive than setting up an ordinary high school. Ordinary high school, you just need a few classrooms and a few teachers. Technical high school, you need equipment, facilities. So it costs money, but that is the only answer.
I think we will stop
Careful,
the process
otherwise you
there.
may sue me for defamation. If I'm not careful.
But you have been in the last few years working here in Bhutan on the Royal Tutorial Project.
Correct, yes.
Earlier there was a question about how we are innovating enough
Right.
to suit the 21st century situation. So what's happening to the Royal Tutorial
Right.
Project?
The Royal Tutorial Project arose from a conversation some years ago with His Majesty when I was commenting on a rather awful physics lesson that I had seen in a certain high school. And so His Majesty said to me, well, why don't you make a half-hour program on physics and get BBS to broadcast it? I won't repeat to you what my reply was because I had never done anything like that. Anyway, we did. If a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing. Correct.
You did it
we did.
properly though.
No, we did our first program on radioactivity. Incidentally, we went down to the Sobje Bazaar and at a fruit stall holder, we were saying how all his fruit was radioactive, and he actually understood and he wasn't very happy. However, we have now done 167 half-hour programs on science, mathematics, and now other things. And we'll be broadcasting once a month a Bhutanese culture program, which was originally made by your organization, Loden Foundation. I believe that the purpose of making these programs is several-fold. May I outline? Number one, make it simple. Number two, not a single of my programs is in a classroom. Outside, use the resources that are all around us. If you want a lens, look at a raindrop on a leaf on a tree just outside. So keep it simple, make it relevant to Bhutan, because lots of programs that you can get on the internet and YouTube, they're fine, but they're not always very relevant to Bhutan. Thirdly, hoping to give an idea to some teachers that you don't have to sit here with your chalk going like this, I'm writing this down, you copy that into your notebooks and then learn it off by heart. So I'm trying to get away from that idea, and I'm hoping by just doing it, teachers will see something different. Well now, as I say, we've made 167 half-hour programs. We are in fact the longest running regular weekly show on BBS. And now we really have got a new task, and very exciting, and we're looking forward to it, which is to provide content for the new Channel 3. And I hope that not only, one thing I have to say, originally our audience were school students, but I get comments from all sorts of people, old men, a retired old brigadier of the Royal Bodyguard who had very little English. He came up to me and he said, "Oh, Mr. Michael, Newton third law, very good." So our audience is the nation. and we are very conscious of that. We've had some brilliant speakers, a professor of mathematics at Oxford, Lucy Hawking, the daughter of Stephen Hawking, etc.
But television, at least among young people, is a bit obsolete now. So
No.
what are you doing to innovate?
Right, well, what we've done, we're putting our programs on YouTube.
Yes.
All this idea of obsolete is a load of, with respect, it's a load of rubbish. People watch the television, not everybody, but lots of people watch.
Young people.
Yeah,
who
never
should be target
mind
audience.
what I talked about earlier when you said a third of Bhutan is in education, and I said, no, it's not. 100% of Bhutan is in education. If I get a 60-year-old in a bar in Sobji Market watching my program, I am very happy. It's raising the overall knowledge level of the country. Never mind the kids, but the country. Now, if you want to watch it on your computer, we're putting them all on YouTube. The next initiative that I'm hoping to be able to do is take learning to the learners. At the moment, we expect the learners to come to us. You have to go to school. Take learning to the learners. And what we're wanting to do is take the work of the Royal Tutorial Project out across the country.
So on that new sort of idea or venture you want to go on, you have been here for a long time. In fact, you mentioned the other day that you were the only sort of non-Bhutanese person when there was an archery match in celebration of Bhutan joining the United Nations.
Let me
50
tell
years
you,
ago.
I think I was the only Chilip at the celebration to join the UN.
Nevertheless, you are one of the very few, even if there are others. What do you think the UN could do to take learning to the learners, or to make education systematic?
Right. Do you want a
Because
direct, an immediate
very
answer?
brief answer. Yes.
With Mr. Daly sitting there?
Indeed.
Right. We want a bus. We want an audio-visual equipped bus. I've called
This
it...
is for the Royal Tutorial Project
Yes,
you are specific.
yes.
I'm talking about general education.
The Royal Tutorial Project is general education.
No,
Science, mathematics, English, culture. What more do you want?
I'm talking about UN's role in helping the education system.
Well, I'm telling you, Dr. Karma, let us take learning. Imagine the thrill. You are in a remote school. You're told tomorrow, and I've called it the STEM mobile, but I've revised that to the STEAM mobile to bring arts in. You're told, why? The STEAM mobile is coming to our school tomorrow. It appears. What we do, we show one or two Royal Tutorial Project programs. We also have somebody who talks about one or two of the topics. We have somebody capable of talking about careers in science and technology, education, mathematics, art. We carry on each journey. A person can be different each time, and you will be one of them.
Sounds fantastic and exciting, and I hope the UN will fund the bus or buses.
Right.
My last question, Michael. We here try to inspire people to read, because we believe that reading is very, very important. It could be reading, it could be a printed book, but what are your favorite books? If you can mention one or two,
Right.
and why? So other people may read.
Well, I only have one favourite little book, which is a kid's book, which is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I share that interest with the Indian ambassador, incidentally, which raises her in my respect enormously. It's a wonderful little book. But what I have learned in life has not come from books. It's come from people. What I have learned in life has come from all the wonderful people and all the awful people. I think this is so important to understand. We talk about reading. The fact of the matter is, are we reading? We're talking. The majority of your communication with other people happens through speaking and listening, not reading. Dr. Karma is not sending me a letter with his question on it. He's asking me, and I'm replying. And I would like to put, if you want to know about change in the school curriculum, I would give much more emphasis to oracy. In other words, speaking and listening. And because of the hierarchical system of Bhutan, the average Bhutanese is very reluctant to speak. So I would have a lot of emphasis given to communication by word and ear.
Yeah, our suggestion is never sort of either or. I mean, I think we should have reading and conversations as we are doing right now. The Prince, by the way, has been also translated into Dzongkha. So
Has it
if
really?
people want
Wonderful.
to read it in Dzongkha, I
Wonderful.
think it's available. I think it's already 1:15. So I'll wrap up this session. If you have any final words to add, if you
Only my final message, if I may. Take opportunities. Don't be afraid to take an opportunity, even if it might look a bit risky. Learn from your mistakes. I have made many, many mistakes in my life. I react against, in Bhutan, I'm very honoured that I'm sort of quite respected. It embarrasses me. I have made many mistakes in my life. I am not a great model of how to be at all. I've made many mistakes, but you try to learn from your mistakes. And so I would leave you with the 3 messages. Take opportunities, learn from your mistakes, don't be afraid to take risks, and if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing right.
Well, try to do
Thank
it correctly if possible. But I think you already got enough proverbial sayings from our very honored guest. It's a ritual for me to wrap up the session with a Bhutanese proverb or a saying from our sort of spiritual classical heritage. And today I thought I'll choose something related to learning and education. It comes from Sakya Lekshe, if you've heard of this text, full of really inspiring words. Kepa lobi duna duk, dewar dugla kemisi, dewa chungla chapai, chenbe dewa topisi. A very quick, rough English translation. An expert had a hard life while learning. So, make a lot of mistakes, as Michael would put it. An easy life doesn't make an expert. Those who are attached to small pleasures will not be able to achieve greater happiness. Thank you all for joining us at this 42nd Bhutan Dialogue session. Thank you, Michael, for sharing
Pleasure. Thank you for
wisdom,
inviting.
insights, and wonderful advices. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.